Good morning, everyone. I'm Juhi Dhawan, macro strategist at Wellington Management and a member of the NABE board. It is truly a distinct honor to welcome Ambassador Catherine Tai to the NABE annual meeting. While Catherine Tai needs really no introduction if you are involved in anything to do with trade, I still think it's just worth spending a couple of minutes talking about her distinguished career. She was sworn in as the 19th U.S. Trade Representative in 2021, and as a member of the President's Cabinet, Ambassador Tai is the principal trade advisor, negotiator, and spokesperson on U.S. trade policy. Prior to her unanimous Senate confirmation, Ambassador Tai spent most of her career in public service focusing on international economic diplomacy, monitoring, and enforcement. She previously served as Chief Trade Counsel and Trade Subcommittee Staff Director for the House Ways and Means Committee in the United States Congress. In this capacity, Ambassador Tai played a pivotal role in shaping U.S. trade law, negotiating strategies, and bilateral and multilateral agreements, including the USMCA. Ambassador Tai is an experienced WTO litigator. She previously developed and tried cases for the Office of the United States Trade Representative, eventually becoming the Chief Counsel for China Trade Enforcement. Before transitioning to federal service, she practiced law in the private sector, clerked for district judges, and taught English in Guangzhou, China. Ambassador Tai earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in history from Yale University and a Juris Doctor from Harvard Law School. She is fluent in Mandarin. Many of the issues that face our country today, I can't think of a more qualified person than Ambassador Tai to be in the lead on the trade policy side. So very much looking forward to our discussion, and please use the NABE app to send us some more questions.
I'm getting a note on sound. Oh, there I am.
Is that good? All right. Can you hear me? That's an easier way of asking. Yes. Okay, perfect. Let's start first with what seems like a whirlwind of travel that you've been up to. Cambodia, Kenya, Germany, Indonesia. Can you talk a little bit about what you're hearing from our trade partners, what kind of issues you're discussing with, and where that focus of policy is for the Biden administration?
I'd be delighted to. Just very selfishly, I did spend most of September on the road. I started in LA hosting with Gina Raimondo the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework ministers meeting, the first in-person ministerial where we brought all 14 countries together to kick off our work. It was extremely energizing. Little did I know that I'd be spending the rest of the month on the road. Went to Nairobi for the new President Ruto's inauguration, Berlin for the G7 trade ministerial, Cambodia for ASEAN engagements, Bali for the G20, and then my last stop was in Tokyo for former Prime Minister Abe's funeral before coming home at the end of the month. And it was a whirlwind. It was an incredible, I'm reminded of why field trips are so important for kids' education. It was, in a way, for me, a real privilege and luxury in terms of a field trip to meet with my counterparts in person. Sometimes not even my counterparts. We had an audience with President Ruto on the day of his inauguration. To just learn about what's going on in the rest of the world. I am really inspired by the title for this year's NABE meetings, referencing the instability, the fragility and the volatility that the global economy is going through, and our own economy as part of that. It's been very, very interesting, the themes that consistently come up in my engagements with our partners. And that is that for anyone who has a position in government, who is responsible for economic policy, whether it's domestic, international, or like on trade, it's both, we are all focused on trying to successfully navigate our way out of this period of instability. while there is still instability going on. And so the focus is really on looking for those opportunities to promote on our own, but also especially working together to promote the goals of resilience, sustainability, inclusion, inclusiveness in terms of the opportunity that we're going to create. That is true across the board. From our developing country partners, I hear an additional theme and element of looking for attracting this next generation of investment, of capacity building and growth. And then from some of our most advanced economy partners, the concerns around sustainability and the geopolitical constraints that we are clearly seeing come up and proliferate in our economy. So it really is, in times of challenge and crises, they are also times of opportunity, and that's part of the reason why I'm so delighted to be here, because I think that our business sector, our business leaders, in terms of the vitality of the American economy, that it is our businesses that have demonstrated the highest levels of skill in terms of adaptation and adaptability, and where we are all focused on rebuilding confidence in the American economy, in the global economy, in a version of globalization that feels like it is built to last and that is fair, that business is going to be an important partner that we have to have rowing in the same direction with us.
Well, thank you for that. This is going to open up a lot of questions. So let's first delve into what I think has been your really brainchild in terms of the success of creating an Indo-Pacific economic framework. Out of nothing, it seems like, you have come up and found 13 partners, accounting for 40% of global GDP, 60% of the world's population. What kind of successes are you looking for from this framework as a contributor to growth in coming years? Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so the first comment, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is itself feels like a village, and it has taken a village to get it to where it is today. So it really is about this collectivity and building something together as a group. If I'm going to go just to the bottom line in terms of what are the goals of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, I think I can express it in two concepts. One of them is durability, and the other one of them, again, is confidence. And it is something that we are working on together, 14 countries across 4 different pillars. So, let me drill down a little bit more for this particular group of able, technical, and economic thinkers. Let me start with the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is not a traditional free trade agreement. That is by design, that is intentional. We are doing something different. It is new, and it is also exciting because it is new. Now, one of the fundamental innovations comes in the architecture of what we're calling for short the IPEF itself. Trade is a component. Trade is the traditional way in which we have economically engaged our partners. But it is not the only component, because we feel strongly from our own experience that a meaningful economic engagement from the United States with partners in this region of the world has to be about more than just trade. And so we've got a trade component. We've got the second pillar is on supply chains. I know supply chains is on everyone's minds because I saw the title for the session right before this one, and it was about assessing the resiliency of supply chains. The third one is on decarbonization and infrastructure. Again, an area where we are running up against the limits of the approaches that we have taken before, and therefore are facing the opportunities of how we can work together with other economies to seize the moment on investing in our infrastructure and adapting to this need for decarbonization. And then the final pillar is kind of a tried and true pillar of disciplines that I think that all people who have worked in business will be familiar with. It's a good governance pillar. The two components there are on tax and anti-corruption. And again, I think that that is an area that we all understand in past times, in the present, and in the future are going to be key indicators of the confidence worthiness of this particular engagement that we're building, and also the individual economies that we're engaging. So, it's the spirit of innovation, and within the trade pillar where USTR leads, we have some familiar components on trade facilitation. That is trade speak for the administration of customs practices, being able to move goods across borders quickly, efficiently, on a risk-based method, to transparency and good regulatory practices, both for our goods trade and our services trade, but also the digital economy, an area of tremendous opportunity, but also significant risks as we are encountering them in the digital transformation of our economies, to labor and environment, which for the United States have been a core part of our trade practice for several decades now on a bipartisan consensus basis. But it is part of the program that we are bringing to our partners, especially in the Indo-Pacific, to address the risks and again, to build confidence in the economic growth of our partners in this region.
It definitely seems like one of the really interesting and exciting opportunities for the future. So I look forward to hearing more about this in the coming year. Let's stick with the idea of supply chains, because it is certainly one that is very, very important for most folks here and for the global economy. It seems like recent conversations post the CHIPS Act with Mexico have something to do with semiconductor production, but also ideas like testing or so on and forth. Can you speak a little bit about what role Mexico may play in the future in this area, and how you're viewing, the upside possibilities in this direction?
Well, Mexico is often on our minds, as is Canada, just because of geography. Again, as much as we are into the worlds of pushing into the frontiers of cyberspace and outer space, there are real reasons for us to remember that we are, still products of this brick and mortar, solid world where geography matters a lot. We see that happening in Eastern Europe as well. Mexico is also quite a bit on our minds in trade, because we had just gone through in the previous administration a renewal of our economic vows, if you will.
Under your leadership, as I recall.
Between our three partners, and I certainly did have front row participation in that renewal, which was ultimately successful, which was to replace the NAFTA with the USMCA. It is interesting, even in the renewal and the creation of the USMCA, we got that through Congress in December of 2019 through the House, January of 2020 in the Senate. So you have to also appreciate that the USMCA was renewed and built for the 21st century before the pandemic really hit us with full force, and also before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So in a way, what we are experiencing right now is the potential that is baked into the USMCA and the renewal of this North American partnership, and how we are going to navigate the challenges that we're facing today with respect to supply chain resilience, semiconductors, and in other sectors. There are actually a number of things going on in the USMCA that I think will put potentially US-Mexico, Canada-US-Mexico competitiveness on a strong path. The challenge is, though, that nothing is preordained, and even with the enabling environment of the USMCA, there's still policy decisions and political will that will determine how fully we embrace these opportunities. And one aspect of the USMCA that I never hesitate to highlight is the raising of the standards for worker protections and also expansion on environmental protections in the USMCA from the NAFTA, and the creation of a labor-specific rapid response enforcement mechanism inside of the USMCA, which For the first time ever, we at USD are using a trade agreement, using the mechanisms inside that trade agreement to empower workers in Mexico and also empower workers in the United States to be able to advocate for themselves and to allow for a program in Mexico to succeed in terms of growing that middle class and raising wages, an area where President Lopez Obrador and President Biden actually are working towards a shared purpose. So I think that, in terms of the opportunities for U.S.-Mexico North American competitiveness, we have all the elements for success, but crucially, we need to see decision-making across the partnership that will actually realize that success.
So we're seeing China also attempt to connect with Mexico. Do you have concerns in that area?
Do I have concerns? Look, I think that the conversation around the economic competition with China is often very two-dimensional and also very zero-sum. The fact of the matter is that the United States and China are the two largest economies in the world. The relationship that we have with each other and the relationship that we have with the rest of the world is profound. This, globally interconnected world economy, you cannot separate out the United States or China. But for sure, there is increasingly over recent years this sense that we are in competition, and I think that we have to acknowledge that we are. Nevertheless, I think that the approach needs to be that we, the United States, bring a program that is an affirmative vision for the kind of global economy that we want to enable, one that creates opportunities for our people, that empowers our workers, allows for innovations, and ultimately is a creative and prosperous environment. And I think that, in spelling out that vision, then, we also have to bring a program, whether it's with Mexico or with other developing economies, emerging economies, opportunities, real opportunities for development and growth that give them a seat at the global economic table. And I think that that is actually a really important element of what we are trying to build towards, which, on the topic of inclusivity and building confidence in the global economy, it is one where the pie grows, and actually that there are more people seated at the table enjoying that pie. And by people, I mean, the people within our own economies, but also critically the different countries who are able to benefit from this system and this vision.
I can see questions coming. Keep them coming. I promise we're going to get to as many of them as we can. So we're going to stick with China here. Your office recently decided to maintain all existing Section 301 tariffs on China, and further review of the individual tariff lines is underway per the release that we recently saw from your office. What would you be looking for in a company or product that would portend a reduction or removal in tariffs? And what attributes are you weighing for maintaining tariffs? Can you walk us a little bit through kind of the timeline and what kind of criteria you're looking for from here?
So I think in talking about the tariffs, I know that there are very strong feelings about just tariffs in general, and then these tariffs in particular. Let me say a couple words. I think that it's important not to lose sight of why the tariffs were applied in the first place. And I often get these questions, especially when I'm in Asia. Why do you continue to punish China with the tariffs? And I think that requires us to go back to tariffs are at their root a revenue-raising measure. They are a tool. They can be used for different purposes. I think more recently, in terms of the response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, you have seen us dial up tariffs on Russian imports. Those are punishing sanction tariffs. Those are meant to take away something from Russia as a consequence of a major breach that we have seen from Russia in the national security area. In terms of the tariffs that have been applied to China, they're based on the Section 301 statute, which is USTR's trade enforcement statute. That is actually another application of this kind of otherwise neutral tool called the tariff. These are playing field leveling, fairness balancing tariffs. And I think that you will recall that there was a 2018 Section 301 investigation that the Trump administration ran on intellectual property rights abuses, forced tech transfer practices. Issues that not just American companies, large and small, but all 9 Chinese companies have faced in doing business with China, doing business in China, legitimate, long-standing challenges. And I just want everyone to keep in mind, one, these are not punishing tariffs, they're meant to be playing field leveling tariffs. The other aspect of the tariffs is the need for an overall realignment and rebalancing in the US-China trade relationship in particular. And that goes to the need for the strategic deployment of these playing field leveling tariffs. So I think that with respect to the review that we have opened up required by the Section 301 statute, a lot of those critical questions are going to be the strategic deployment of the tariffs, and also a recognition that in trying to move to a different reality where we have a realigned and more strategically balanced relationship in our trade with China, that the changes that we need to see in firm behavior, in the structure of supply chains, is something that is going to take time to see its effects. And it's not a switch that we can flip. And so that is something else that we are taking into mind, which is, if we are agreed that we need to move to a more strategic trade structure and architecture, it is going to be important for us to understand what that transition looks like and how to get there. And I think that those are some of the types of things that I think about when thinking about the strategic rebalancing of this relationship that includes the tariff tools.
So maybe a follow-up based on some of the questions we're getting. Labor issues, climate issues, domestic manufacturing, maybe 3 priorities that might influence some of what you're thinking about in this stabilization factor. Are there other priorities that we should be considering, that you will be considering as you conduct the review? And then any sense of the timeline of when some of this will come to fruition as it passes?
So stay tuned. What we're doing is required by this review that is currently ongoing, is required by statute. So, there's should not be a lot of discretion there. And in terms of the specific criteria and how we will run, I think the things that audience members will be interested in, stay tuned to the announcements that will be coming from, in particular, my general counsel's office. I don't want to get crosswise with them by, sort of shooting off my mouth here and, using words that have been very, very carefully chosen. But on that, I think just continue to stay tuned.
We're going to stick with Asia. There are a lot of questions here. Maybe turning to Taiwan. We are approaching a very important weekend in China. President Xi may be getting his 3rd term. How concerned are you as you look about some of the developments that are taking place in Taiwan and China relations, and what would be your message as you look at what is transpiring there?
Yes, October is an important month. In this part of Asia, October 1st is a national day for the People's Republic. October 10th is essentially National Day for Taiwan, and the 20th Party Congress is coming up in just a couple days. Over the weekend, I think I may have also seen some interesting tweets too, weighing in on the China and Taiwan challenges. Look, I guess what I would say is this. The People's Republic of China, Taiwan are both really important trading partners of the United States. If you were looking at supply chains and some of these critical supply chains, whether you're talking about critical technologies or you were actually talking about, supply chains and where production and supply is coming from and into the United States, these are two economies that you cannot ignore. What we are doing is bringing a program of economic engagement that is tailored to the particular relationship that we have with these economies. And I think that one point that I cannot stress enough is that with respect to trade policy is a very, very interesting policy area because we don't exist without other policy vectors. We will always sit at the intersection of foreign policy, and that includes national security policy, but also economic policy with a heavy focus on domestic economic policy. And I think that it's designed to be an uncomfortable place to be. And you've always, in doing trade policy, got to be tuned into both of those conversations. Two conversations, by the way, that don't often intersect except for through trade policy, and to make sure that what we are doing in trade policy aligns with our goals in the other areas. So, in terms of Asia, the Indo-Pacific, this is an extremely dynamic area, a lot of opportunities, but also marked by many, many challenges. And it is part of the reason why a steady, consistent, focused, responsible approach is so important.
The questions are fantastic, so I'm going to get to as many of these as we can. Can you discuss why the administration has avoided lifting tariffs even temporarily, given their impact on inflation, the possible help that we could get?
I'm surprised that I've been asked this question. I really am very, very shocked. I'm just kidding. This is a very frequent question that I'm asked. Look, I'll go back to my answer to the previous question, which is responsible, consistent, steady policy that we need. This maybe doesn't apply as much to the business community as the press community. I also get questions from the media folks about this too, and I think part of it is in the previous few years, I think that the adrenaline that came with covering trade, whether from a business perspective, but definitely from the media perspective, is something that maybe it creates a little bit of withdrawal. But in many ways, the challenges that we have with China did not happen overnight. They have been many years in the making. And I think that in terms of navigating our way, we shouldn't be impatient or too anxious about what our next steps should be. I think that there's an important set of strategic considerations that we have to take into account. On the specific inflation point, I know that the public debate had been really at a very high pitch earlier this year, but for all the business economists that are assembled as part of the NABE community, I trust that all of you understand on a professional, academic level that the inflation challenges that we are facing today, whether it's here in the United States or worldwide, because we are all grappling with it, those factors are complex, and whatever part these particular tariffs might play, it is very small. And in terms of the part that these tariffs play in the strategic realignment and the responsible strategic realignment of the U.S.-China relationship, it is actually an important, not the only part, but an important part. And I would ask everyone to think about the tariffs in those contexts.
I'm going to keep going. So I know that in discussions with you in the past, I've always been struck at the priority you place on enforcement of trade agreements. It's always a tricky task for any administration. There have been several cases that have been brought up in the last few years since USMCA was finalized. How would you say the enforcement mechanisms and dispute settlement mechanisms have held up? And are they setting any kind of precedent for trade outside of North America as well?
So I think that the credibility of a trading system, whether it's regional or multilateral, really goes to whether or not the rules are enforceable. Otherwise, the rules are just words on a page. And certainly in the renewal and the creation of the USMCA, at the late stage of the renegotiation, after the renegotiation with the parties, it's the renegotiation between congressional Democrats and the Trump administration, there is a really strong focus on the enforceability of these rules. And no matter how high you've dialed the standards, no matter how modern the rules that you've brought in, if you can't enforce them, then really, it's not worth very much. It's certainly not worth very much to the members of Congress and their constituents. So that's been a particular focus. USMCA passing on the significantly large margins, 89% of the House and the Senate voting in favor, for us means that one of our highest priorities is making sure that the spirit and the letter of the USMCA are preserved, and that we are investing in ensuring that the USMCA is meaningful. That goes across the board. We have in some of the more traditional trade areas initiated, we are now on our second go-round of enforcement proceedings with Canada on dairy market access. With Mexico, we have initiated a case on their energy market policies. But in environment and labor, which if you follow the NAFTA story, you will know that these were particular criticisms of the original NAFTA, that they might have had labor and environment rules, which was a good thing, but it turned out that they were unenforceable and there were no teeth. And in fact, no case was ever able to be advanced from beginning to end under the NAFTA. And we have now initiated our first enforcement proceeding under the environment, focused on conservation efforts for the vaquita porpoise. And then also we have at this point initiated and concluded 5 rapid response mechanism cases. One that we self-initiated, the other 4 in response to petitions, where by virtue of our using this mechanism in partnership with the Mexican government, which had finished its own labor justice reform as we were negotiating the USMCA, have actually enabled unions at 5 different facilities in Mexico to independent unions to represent the workers who elected them, resulting in real wage benefits, real benefits for real people. And the labor and environment pieces are especially important to us because of the need for our trade practice and frankly for the global trading system to rebuild trust and confidence with our people and with those who know the most and advocate for our planet. I think that the implications are that this is an important innovation, if you will, or a correction for the direction of U.S. trade policy that we are bringing to our other trading partners outside of North America, and that we are trying also to bring to the multilateral system based in Geneva around the WTO.
So this is a great follow-up question, because you've given a very clear explanation of why you prioritize this. But folks in the audience are wanting to ask, how would you respond to allies' concerns that trade policy is now more focused on standards rather than market access?
So to translate this, for those of you who are not familiar with trade lingo, everything that we do is about access to markets, access to our markets, our access to other markets. In fact, I had a conversation with one of our new ambassadors who comes from the business world and has been the CEO of some very big companies. And I was describing to her what we were doing in the IPEF. And I said, well, but we've designed the IPEF not to address market access. And I really try not to slip into trade lingo because I think that is very confusing. And so she stopped me and she said, but everything you've just described is about access to markets. And I said, no, that's right, that's right. When I say market access in trade language, that's tariff liberalization. And so, this is an important point to make. The IPEF is designed not to include tariff liberalization. And I'm not embarrassed by that. I'm not on the defensive about it. This is a feature and not a bug. Let me explain a little bit more. In a speech that I gave last week at the Roosevelt Institute, I did say we have not sworn off market liberalization and tariff reduction. But importantly, the way we have done it in the past has been in service of a theory of the case around globalization, peace, and prosperity that I think that we have discovered real limits to. And that theory of the case has been that the more you trade with each other, the more liberalization you can bring. The more trade that there is, necessarily, the more peace and prosperity you will have. One of the things that we have seen is with respect to the more prosperity, yes, I think that if you look at the past several decades, the overall pie has grown. But who has access to that pie? I think that the growing inequality concerns in many of our economies goes to the point that we've got to rethink the way that we grow this pie. The other aspect of it is the assumption that countries that trade with each other do not go to war with each other. Nothing could be clearer than Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that was not a market-based, economically rational decision, and that even countries that trade together, and this has probably always been the case, if you go back to World War I and further, even countries that rely on each other for their prosperity are at some points motivated to ignore all of that and nevertheless to go to war. Russia's invasion, Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine, shrank the pie for Russia, shrank the pie for Ukraine. And I think that, not being a business economist like the rest of you, feel pretty confident in saying that that decision is shrinking the pie for everyone. So in this context, I think that what we're trying to rethink is how do you do tariff liberalization and tariff reduction and market liberalization in service of a greater good? That tariff reduction and market liberalization are not goals in and of themselves. How can you do this to serve the goal of resiliency, sustainability, and more inclusiveness in the prosperity that you're creating? And until we come up with that formula, we're not going to do the thing that I feel very strongly has brought us to the point where we are right now. Again, in terms of responsible policy making, in terms of focusing on building confidence, I think you need to have a proper diagnosis of what's going on right now in order to have a chance, in order to have the credibility of building something that is going to be stronger, better, more durable, and more fair. And I think that there are also examples of those who are doubling down on the earlier formula, who I think are running into the challenge of not seeing success from not evolving and adapting, not taking the lessons that are very painful right now. And truly, I think that, if in this very painful period that we're still in, if we cannot learn the lessons, then I think that we really undermine the ability to build that confidence to demonstrate that what we are building towards, what we have adapted to, is going to withstand the kinds of shocks that we have just experienced.
I have so many more questions, but we're literally running out of time. So I'm going to pose the last question as somewhat open-ended. It comes from our audience, but I hope that you will give us your personal spin on it as well. So is the era of free trade agreements over? And if so, what do you see as the future of trade in terms of What's that new framework look like for you?
So, not to be super dramatic about it, but I think that the era that we are in right now is not serviced by the traditional approach to free trade agreements that we have had. Building on and referencing the answer that I gave before. And so the issue is that, trade policies, like all your other policies, have to be tailored to the challenges and the opportunities that you face today. They don't exclude the possibility that, we develop a program that gets us through these particular challenges where we are comfortable bringing back elements of policies that we have had before. But certainly in this moment of instability and volatility, I do think that we badly need new ideas. And as much as we value innovation in our technology, we need innovation in our economic policies. We need innovation in our approach to economics, full stop. I think that watching very, very smart people grappling with what's going on in the world, in the United States today, all the different indicators that are defying traditional definitions of what constitutes a recession, what are the drivers of inflation, how do you solve one and the other. I think what this means is we've all got to get smarter. And that innovation that the United States has always been good at, has always prized, all of us have a role in facilitating that innovation and bringing about the confidence that we are all trying to rebuild, regain, and frankly, earn in our new economic reality.
My goodness. I think you're going to have to come back, Ambassador Tai. Thank you so very much on behalf of NABE for taking the time. We really